Hi, me again with a UK indie focused video today, all about Manchester. Specifically, 10 of the lesser acts from Greater Manchester, which you'll see on the screen behind me. YouTube, the larger media, is awash with content about the big names of the Manchester alternative music scene. The Smiths, the Buzzcocks, Joy Division, New Order, Stone Roses, Oasis. I've even got in on the act myself with my fall primer, and I swear part 2 is on the way. And beneath that top layer, the big names, you hit a rich seam of other much-loved acts like James in Spiral Carpets, Magazine, Happy Mondays, Dorothy Column, Doves, New Fads, one of my early videos on the channel, Elbow even. But if you keep digging, if you go a little deeper, you'll finally end up at today's 10. Yeah, this is a selection of more difficult or obscure artists, some short-lived projects, a handful of kind of John Peel favourites, and a few acts that just missed out on a wider audience for one of a number of reasons. So on with it. As ever, not a top 10. These are arranged roughly chronologically, and to qualify, they all had to originate from the Greater Manchester area. First up, The Passage, an early post-punk band forming in 1978, originally as a drums, bass, keyboards trio of Richard Witts, Tony Friel, at that time he was in The Fall as well, and Lorraine Hilton. The music press of the time, Paul Morley at The Enemy in particular, were very quick to pick up on them, and early gigs saw them playing alongside, contemporaries like Joy Division, Cabaret Voltaire, The Fall, A Certain Ratio. The Passage released 4 full-length albums and a host of singles and EPs during their 5 years of activity, also recording 3 Peel sessions along the way between 1980 and 1982. And they also feature in one of those classic early UK indie compilations I talked about in a video before, that one being Cherry Red Records' Pillows and Prayers compilation from 1982. Their contribution was the track XOYO, a 1982 single which kind of almost broke the band, but it never really took them up a level. A much neglected, quite odd-sounding post-punk band, and whilst they've been anthologised and compiled and reissued over the years, they do seem destined for that kind of cult status. Another early post-punk act from Manchester who tend to get a nod of recognition, mostly for their memorably daft-sounding name. That would be Crispy Ambulance. Signed to Factory Records following a DIY single release, they, much like The Passage, they shared stages with a lot of their post-punk label mates, among them Joy Division and Section 25. Joy Division trivia here. In fact, singer of the band, Alan Hempsall, he actually deputised for Ian Curtis at the legendary Derby Hall show in Bury in April of 1980, I think it was. And that was following Ian's first suicide attempt. The band's only studio album during that initial run was 1982's The Plateau Phase, and it's a cracker. It fuses kind of factory-esque post-punk with, hints of kraut, prog rock even. I'd say this sounds more like Peel, though, than like Joy Division. Okay, moving on. The next 3 bands all featured on the legendary NME Rough Trade C86 compilation cassette, with the first 2 both releasing on the extremely influential, in UK indie circles at least, Ron Johnson Records. At 3, Big Flame, key exponents of that cut-up, white-out kind of funk and beefheart-inflected post-punk that was a thing in indie circles in the first half of the 80s. A trio of Greg Keefe on guitar, Dill Green on drums, and Alan Brown on bass and vocals. The band released a string of singles and EPs between 1984 and 1986, recording 4 sessions for Peel within the same period. If you're looking for a reference, that guitar sound of Greg's always puts me in mind of that kind of shattering smash treble sound of the Minutemen's D Boon, but the manic intensity and spastic clatter of Big Flame takes them a bit further out there for me. Yeah, a fantastic but very short-lived band. Alan Brown went on to refine this sound in his post-Big Flame project, The Great Leap Forwards. But along with that, he did also serve a short spell as the drummer with their label mates, who happen to be the next band up. Yeah, at 4 on the list, I've got A Witness. That Ron Johnson record sound is still very much in evidence here, but I think A Witness are a smidge poppier and definitely throw in more of that kind of wonky, off-kilter, beef-hearty garagey blues thing. Their C86 contribution, Sharpened Sticks, is a great starting point for new listeners, I think. Shades maybe of where Davey Henson of the Fire Engines would end up with his Nectarine Number 9 project. Nagging, nasal vocals, lumpy riffing, twisted pop melodies. A four-piece for most of their existence. Like Big Flame, they squeezed in 4 Peel sessions over a very fertile 3-year period, which also saw them release a single full-length LP. That's 1986's I Am John's Pancreas. Their last session in 1989 saw the appearance of one of their most beloved songs, certainly amongst Peel listeners. That would be I Love You, Mr. Disposable Razors, which was actually a co-write between singer and guitarist Rick Aitken and Alan Brown. And this was the one that was earmarked to be the single that would break the band to a bigger audience, certainly on the back of a wedding present tour support they had lined up. But unfortunately, the universe had other plans. Yeah, Rick Aitken died in a climbing accident in October of 1989, and the band just felt unable to continue as a unit following this tragedy. That single was ultimately put out posthumously in November of the same year, the last thing A Witness would ever release. At 5 now, and the last of the C86 contributors here, and that band is the Bodines. And geography nerds, this is a bit of a cheat because the Bodines actually hail from Glossop, which is in Derbyshire, right on the edge of the Peak District, and by my reckoning, only about a mile or two away from the official border marking the edge of Greater Manchester. But screw it, it's close enough for me. And according to most of the local knowledge that I've managed to glean, residents of Glossop, what would that be, Glossopites? Glossopitarians? I don't know. They would consider Manchester as their city. So it's certainly a lot closer to Manchester than it is to Derby. So the Bodines, the quintessential UK indie pop band of the 80s, there's certainly an argument based on their sound for that. One listen to Therese, their C86 contribution and their second single on Creation should immediately transport you right back to 1986. Yeah, a little kind of tin pot Motown beat, frantically strummed Rickenbackers, boyish, lovelorn, summery pop, huge debt really to Orange Juice and the Go-Betweens maybe. An indie band trapped in 80s amber, it seems. Yeah, they didn't make it into the 90s, but, hey, we've always got Therese, haven't we? And here's the thing, we've reached that point in the latter half of the 80s where Manchester was just around the corner, which I think did have an impact on how some bands from Manchester were perceived. Yeah, some Manc bands just didn't necessarily fit in with that kind of casual, good time, club-friendly vibe, and they probably suffered a little bit for it in the long term. Peel, the music press, Snub TV, they could all help these kind of awkward bands, but it did feel in slightly broad terms that the less, I don't know, how can I put it, happy acts, they did tend to get a bit sidelined. Anyway, a case in point at number 6 from Salford, but very closely associated with the kind of the Hume scene of the 80s, as were the next band on this list. I've got King of the Slums. Yeah, these are a pretty great band in my book, with a very tough, caustic lyricist and singer in Charlie Keeher. Yeah, all kind of kitchen sink, grime and kind of breathy sneer. And a fantastic violinist in Sarah Curtis, adding a shrieking, electrified string sound, which immediately singled the band out as different from your standard indie outfit. It took them a few years to toughen and hone their sound, I think, but by 1989's album Barbarous English Fare, and its quickfire follow-up, Dandelions, they sounded pretty special to me. Yeah, the Vicious British Boyfriend EP of 1989 is a particularly great and concise example, I think, of what they were about. It sounds like The Fall playing The Smiths' Queen is Dead, with John Cale, raking menacingly across your eardrums. It's really, really great stuff. I do hear some tiny concessions maybe to the dance floor vibes on 1991's Blowsy Weirdos album. Yeah, a little rhythmic shuffle kind of pushed in here and there, but that was their last album of the 20th century. Kind of on again, off again Reformation led to 4 new albums spaced out between 2009 and 2020, but this new iteration of the band was finally and tragically curtailed when Charlie died at the age of 59 in November of 2021. I think if the music of King of the Slums passed you by, please do try and seek it out, because I think they may be the best Manchester band that you've never heard. Next, at 7, and another of the Hume scene bands, this is Dubsex. Yeah, Dubsex were a post-punk 4, sometimes 5-piece of fierce intensity, and they were active from about 1986 through to 1990. The core of the band was Mark Hoyle on guitar and vocals, Kathy Brooks on bass and Roger Cadman on drums. That core being supplemented by at first one and then two guitarists by the time of their dissolution. Another band with 4 sessions for Peel here, all broadcast between 1987 and 1989. They recorded and released 4 EPs and a mini album, all helpfully compiled on a single full-length album called Splintered Faith, within that same time frame. I guess there are a few tracks you could single out for new listeners. Their recording debut, Tripwire, is great, but I think Swerve from the EP of the same name is probably the one. On a first listen, it's eerily and cannily almost similar to Fugazi's Waiting Room. The tracks were released within months of one another, and it really showcases Mark's close, impassioned vocal and the brooding kind of repetitive, cyclical instrumentation. It's all grey textures shot through with flashes of light. Yeah, it's really wonderful stuff. It's very tight, very controlled, and most definitely not baggy. At 8, the last of the Manchester casualties section of this list, this is What Noise. A very inscrutable, underappreciated band, What Noise. And they began as the studio project of Chris and Julia Nagel around about 1986. Chris and Julia were both sound engineers at recording studios in Stockport, Strawberry, Yellow 2, and they hooked up with another live studio sound guy in Tim Harris, who took on all the vocal duties in the band. Yeah, if you like to pore over sleeve notes, Chris Nagel should be a name that you're quite familiar with, being strongly associated with Martin Hannett. Chris was basically his understudy, his right-hand man, often his stand-in. So he has album credits As Long As Your Arm, Joy Division, The Stone Roses, Echo and the Bunnymen, Killing Joke, The Durruti Column, some of them engineering, some mixing, some, full production duties. Far too many to go into here. Go check Discogs for a full list. His then wife, Julia, she's now Julia Adamson, may well be familiar to some of you as a one-time 4 member from about 1995 to 2001. So that's circa the Levitate, Marshall Suite and the Unutterable albums. So What Noise, though? Very heavy on samples, programmed beats, mixing kind of murky, blown-out industrial guitar textures with, thick, oppressive studio treatments. Yeah, here's the band's sole full-length album. It's 1990's Fat, which was released on One Little Indian. Much closer in spirit to some of the kind of sample-heavy European industrial music of the time. Think Young Gods, maybe. This is pretty cool. Don't expect kind of big black levels of shock and awe in this. This is a kind of moody and suffocating spin on industrial, and you get, I think, signs of Chris Nagel's long association with the city's post-punk originators, seeping into the music. Finally, I'm going to give you an honest-to-goodness Manchester band now. At 9, resolutely dance-friendly, and they're probably about as 1990 a band as you could ever hope to find, while still remaining essentially, a footnote in Manchester history. Yeah, I'm talking about Paris Angels from Guide Bridge. And really, they're on this list because, one, they were responsible for one of the greatest indie dance crossover singles of the day. That's Perfume, All On You. And 2, they were absolutely shafted by their label Virgin, being one of a host of bands to be unceremoniously dropped when the label was sold to EMI. The band's Sundew album, which actually managed to make the big boy charts, number 37 in 1991, was pretty well received. The single had been a massive indie club hit, and their follow-up album just never saw the light of day. And I'm not going to get all misty-eyed about baggy or indie dance in general. You really just had to be there to appreciate it. But Perfume was genuinely a pretty special song. Yeah, the mix of these coy kind of jangly guitars and acid house backing was genuinely euphoric sounding. Imagine taking New Order straight from 1982 or 83 and transplanting them directly into 1989, and then you tell them to write a club track on the spot. I think you might get something like Perfume. Yeah, Paris Angels didn't really survive being dropped by the label. They split shortly after, but Paul Wagstaff of the band did make a return on guitar with Black Grape a few years later. It's a shame, really. The Paris Angels, definitely one of those what-if groups of that era. And to close this list, leaving Manchester behind and fast-forwarding to the very beginnings of Britpop, 93 or thereabouts. At 10, I've got Molly Halfhead. And if you've ever posed the question to yourself, hey, I wonder what Oasis would sound like if they'd listened to less Beatles, more magazine, then you find your answer. It's Molly Halfhead. Formed in 1992, singer Paul Barsley had actually been mates and in a band with Noel Gallagher around about 87, 88. So, you know, there may be a genuine grounding for some kind of sonic kinship between the two of them. But make no bones about it, Molly Halfhead are weird. Mixing big, you know, anthemic conceits with twisty, unpredictable riffs and guitar textures. And Bardsley's voice is just this bizarre cocktail of nasal bellow and tortured, buzzing sibilance. It's borderline incomprehensible one moment, and then you get all these kind of cocky Liamisms the next. A string of single releases and a tour support with The Wedding Present culminated in the release of their Sulk album in 1993. It's pretty good, I think, but I do actually prefer their 1995 follow-up. This is Dunce, and I prefer this one quite a bit more. Not so everyone else, apparently. Their label and the record buying public, they disagreed. The band were dropped shortly after this and split up in 1996. And I'm not here to sell Molly Halfhead as, you know, a great lost 90s band or anything, but their weirdness still appeals to me even now. The incongruity of it all is oddly fascinating. And it's that, I think, which kept them off that kind of Britpop top table, I think. You know, what were they all about? I still don't know. And Britpop, at least as far as the music press was concerned, it didn't really allow for uncertainty or contradictions like that. And uncertainty and contradictions is Molly Halfhead in a nutshell. And there you go, 10 bands from Greater Manchester who you may have overlooked. I'm not saying these are the greatest bands of all time, but they certainly kind of have something about them which kind of conjures up a time and a place. And I think sometimes that's enough. As ever, if you've watched this far into the video, thanks very much. Please think about giving me a thumbs up, because that really helps me and the channel and the video. And yeah, subscribe maybe if you want to see more of this. But I will leave it there for today. Yeah, again, you take care and bye for now.